On the 29th of October 2023, the Republic of Turkey celebrated 100 years since its founding in the wake of the collapse of the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. The year 1923 marked the end of more than 600 years of Ottoman imperial rule, which at the height of its power during the 16th century controlled lands across much of the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. Emerging from relative obscurity as a small regional power in northwestern Anatolia, the Ottoman dynasty would begin a period of extraordinary territorial expansion alongside rapid advances in administration, society, and economic systems that allowed one of the most diverse and prosperous empires in history to flourish. But what eventually happened to this once mighty and powerful empire? And how did it help shape the modern Turkish nation of today? This is the history of the Ottoman Empire. To understand how the Ottoman Empire was established, we first need to look at the migration of the Turkic peoples out of Eastern Asia. For centuries, the Turks, who were originally an Asiatic people, gradually migrated westward across the vast Eurasian steppe. By the 7th century, they had reached the region around the Altai Mountains near what is today Russia, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia. From there, they continued moving south and west over the following centuries, with many eventually adopting a semi-nomadic lifestyle around the Caspian and Aral Seas. One of the major Turkic tribes to settle in this region were the Oghuz Turks. However, sometime in the late 10th century, a leader from one of the clans within this tribe, a man named Seljuk, broke away from the main tribal confederation and founded his own dynasty. Over the following decades, Seljuk and his descendants laid the foundations of the Seljuk Empire by expanding into Persia. They became heavily influenced by Persian culture and language, which they adopted for themselves, while also converting to Islam. By the 1060s, the Seljuks had advanced all the way to the borders of the Byzantine Empire in western Anatolia. Growing clashes between the two powers eventually erupted into the Byzantine-Seljuk War. At the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the Seljuks inflicted a crushing defeat on the Byzantine army, allowing them to gain control over much of the Near East and push deeper into modern-day Turkey. Over the next 2 centuries, the Seljuk Empire gradually declined and fragmented into a collection of smaller Turkic states. The Turks themselves, however, remained a major force in Anatolia, especially in the form of the Sultanate of Rum. Although this state also declined by the beginning of the 14th century, it left behind many smaller principalities known as the Anatolian Beyliks scattered throughout the region. It was here among the tribes of northwestern Anatolia that a warlord emerged who would become the founder of the Ottoman Empire. Although the sources describing his life remain unreliable and limited, he is remembered as the founder of the dynasty that carried his name, Osman I. The century following Osman's reign was defined by the Ottomans attempting to conquer the remaining territories of the Byzantine Empire, which had once ruled over much of the eastern Mediterranean. By the 14th century, however, the Byzantines had been reduced to the southern Balkans, mainland Greece, the Greek islands, and a small area in Anatolia. Their empire was ruled from Constantinople, one of the most formidable walled cities in the medieval world and a city that had survived countless sieges throughout its history. A major breakthrough came in 1331 when the city of Nicaea fell to the Turks. Several decades later, in 1369, Adrianople, located near the borders of modern Greece, Bulgaria, and Turkey, also fell to the Ottomans and became their capital for a brief period, while further victories in Serbia and Bulgaria soon followed. A short period of internal instability struck the Ottoman Empire during the early 15th century. But in 1451, Mehmed II reclaimed the Ottoman throne and became determined to capture Constantinople once and for all. In April 1453, he laid siege to the great city. The siege lasted 7 weeks before the walls were finally breached and Ottoman forces poured inside. Fittingly, the final Byzantine emperor was Constantine XI Palaiologos, who shared his name with Constantine the Great, the original founder of the city more than 1,000 years earlier. Constantine XI died fighting on the 29th of May 1453, and Constantinople fell to the Ottomans later that same day. Constantinople then became the capital of the growing Ottoman Empire. As a symbol of Ottoman conquest, the Cathedral of Hagia Sophia, built centuries earlier by the Emperor Justinian I, was converted into a mosque, with its famous minarets added soon afterward. The conquest of the Byzantine Empire and the fall of Constantinople marked only the beginning of Ottoman expansion. Over the centuries that followed, the Ottomans expanded across the eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East, North Africa, the Balkans, and the Black Sea. In the early 1460s, Mehmed II conquered Morea in Greece, the Empire of Trebizond in northern Anatolia, and Bosnia in the Balkans. By the time of his death in 1481, he had expanded into eastern Anatolia, conquered Albania, and established an Ottoman presence on the Crimean Peninsula along the northern shores of the Black Sea. His successor, Bayezid II, proved just as capable. During his reign, he added territories in Syria and the Levant after defeating the Mamluks of Egypt in a struggle for regional dominance. He also strengthened Ottoman control over the Aegean Sea after conflicts with the Republic of Venice between 1499 and 1503. Another major ruler was Suleiman I, who governed from 1512 to 1520. Despite his short reign, he conquered vast areas of North Africa. In 1517, his armies defeated the Mamluks at the Battle of Ridania, bringing Egypt and much of Libya under Ottoman rule, while the famous corsair Hayreddin Barbarossa accepted Ottoman authority in Algeria and Tunisia. Perhaps the greatest Ottoman ruler of all was Suleiman the Magnificent. Ruling for nearly half a century between 1520 and 1566, he oversaw the empire at the height of its power. During his reign, the Ottomans completed the conquest of much of the Balkans and advanced all the way to the gates of Vienna, which they unsuccessfully besieged in 1529. He also secured the island of Rhodes from the Knights of St. John in 1522, captured Tripoli in North Africa in 1551, and expanded into Iraq and the Arabian Peninsula. By the end of his reign, Ottoman territory stretched from Hungary and the northern Black Sea all the way south toward Egypt and Oman, and from Algeria in the west to the Caspian Sea in the east. Much of the Ottoman Empire's success was due to the effectiveness of its military, which combined disciplined infantry, cavalry, and artillery in a way unmatched during its golden age. Among its elite forces were the Janissaries, soldiers taken as child slaves from Christian lands in Europe and converted to Islam. These men were trained under strict discipline and professionalism, making them one of the most effective fighting forces of the era. From this position of strength in the 16th century, the Ottomans spent the next 2 centuries battling Christian powers across Europe. Much of the early struggle centered on control of the Mediterranean against their greatest rival in the region, Spain. At the time, Spain controlled much of southern Italy and many Mediterranean islands and led Christian coalitions against the advancing Ottomans. For decades, fleets clashed repeatedly, culminating in 2 major confrontations in 1565 and 1571. The first was the Great Siege of Malta, when the Ottomans attempted to seize the island from the Knights of St. John. The siege ended in failure for the Ottomans. 6 years later, another Christian coalition led by Spain confronted the Ottoman fleet in 1571. At the Battle of Lepanto off the coast of Greece, more than 400 ships and 130,000 men took part in one of the largest naval battles in history. The Ottomans suffered another defeat. Although this proved the Ottomans could be resisted, it also encouraged them to focus more heavily on expansion deeper into Central Europe. Ever since their victory over Hungary at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, the Ottomans had dreamed of controlling Central Europe. But the Austrian capital of Vienna stood in their way. After a failed siege in 1529, a second massive Ottoman campaign was launched in 1683 under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha. Despite fielding more than 150,000 men, the Ottomans could not capture the city. On the 12th of September, a Christian relief army led by the Polish King John III Sobieski routed the Ottoman forces outside Vienna in what became the largest cavalry charge in history. The defeat marked a major turning point, after which the Ottomans would never again significantly expand into Europe. As the late 17th century moved into the 18th, the Ottoman Empire slowly entered a period of stagnation and decline. Much of this was blamed on increasingly passive sultans who gradually withdrew from active government. In earlier centuries, Ottoman rulers had taken direct control of imperial affairs from the Topkapi Palace in Constantinople. But over time, more authority shifted to the Grand Vizier and a growing class of officials and administrators, while many sultans spent much of their time inside their palaces and harems. The empire itself was highly decentralized. Taxes collected from the provinces funded a large military, while local governors enjoyed a significant degree of autonomy. The Ottoman Empire was also notably tolerant for its era. Although converting to Islam could help someone advance socially, it was never strictly required. Christians, Jews, and followers of other faiths were generally permitted to practice their religions. In fact, the empire became an important refuge for many Jews fleeing persecution in places such as Spain. Cities like Thessaloniki developed into major cosmopolitan centers with large Jewish populations by the early 1500s. The Ottoman Empire was initially very wealthy thanks to trade routes stretching from India and China along the Silk Road towards cities such as Constantinople, Alexandria, Ansh, and Damascus. Over time, however, global trade shifted away from the Mediterranean and toward the Atlantic Ocean. Large ocean-going ships carrying goods from the Americas and Asia bypassed Ottoman territory entirely, reducing the importance of the old overland trade routes that once enriched the empire. As economic decline worsened, the Ottoman Empire increasingly fell behind its European rivals, who were undergoing the scientific revolution and rapid technological advancement. By the 18th century, the empire was no longer viewed as an unstoppable threat but rather as a weakening state open to exploitation. Russia and Austria in particular seized Ottoman lands along the Black Sea, the Caucasus, and the Balkans. Meanwhile, governors in North Africa began acting more independently. By the late 18th century, Algeria, Tunisia, Cyrenaica, and Egypt were virtually independent in all but name. As difficult as the 18th century had been, the 19th century proved even worse. The Ottoman Empire increasingly became known as the sick man of Europe. In 1804, an uprising in Serbia raised serious questions about Ottoman control in the Balkans. The empire continued to fracture in the following decades, especially after the Greek War of Independence began in 1821. By 1829, Greece had become independent with support from Britain, France, and Russia, all of whom wanted to weaken the Ottoman position in the region. Only a year later, France invaded Algeria and began establishing its own colony there. Throughout the 19th century, and especially during the 1850s, Russia continued expanding around the Black Sea. Unlike previous conflicts, however, Britain and France now wanted to prevent the Ottoman Empire from collapsing entirely in order to preserve the balance of power in Europe. As a result, they intervened on the side of the Ottomans during the Crimean War, temporarily slowing the empire's decline. Nevertheless, during the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s, many new nations emerged from Ottoman territory in the Balkans. Romania and Serbia gained independence, while Bulgaria became increasingly autonomous. Austria-Hungary and Russia continued pressuring the empire in both the Balkans and the Caucasus. By the early 1910s, after Italy seized Libya and Albania declared independence, European powers openly discussed dividing what remained of the Ottoman Empire among themselves. This endless period of decline alarmed many younger generations inside the empire, particularly Turkish nationalists who demanded political reform. At the forefront of this movement were the Young Turks, who wanted to replace the old sultanate with a modern constitutional monarchy and a Western-style parliament. In 1908, they launched the Young Turk Revolution, which successfully introduced constitutional government. However, the movement itself was divided between liberals, intellectuals, conservatives, and military figures. As a result, unity proved impossible, and Ottoman politics throughout the 1910s remained unstable and chaotic. Ultimately, the final collapse of the Ottoman Empire became inseparable from the outbreak of World War I. Until then, the Ottomans had avoided joining the two great military alliances that dominated Europe, the Triple Entente of Britain, France, and Russia, and the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. When war erupted in 1914, the Ottomans saw an opportunity to challenge Russian power and therefore join Germany and Austria-Hungary as part of the Central Powers. The empire experienced mixed fortunes during the war. On one hand, Ottoman forces achieved a major victory against British and Anzac troops during the ill-fated Gallipoli campaign. But in the Middle East, the empire lost large territories during the Arab Revolt, encouraged by the British officer T. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia. There was also a darker chapter during the conflict. Beginning in 1915, the Ottoman government carried out acts of genocide against its Armenian population, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 1.5 million people. Overall, the war proved catastrophic for the Ottomans. Like Germany and Austria-Hungary, the empire could no longer sustain the war effort, and by 1918 the Ottoman military was collapsing on multiple fronts. Following the end of World War I, the victorious Allies, Britain, France, Greece, and Italy, occupied large parts of Anatolia and began planning the future of Ottoman territory. The empire's remaining Arab lands in the Middle East were divided between Britain and France as imperial mandates. The Ottoman state was effectively reduced to Anatolia itself. Even this territory was threatened by Greek and Italian ambitions. Greece hoped to reclaim lands once connected to the ancient Greek and Byzantine worlds, while Italy sought territorial compensation for its role in the war. All of this sparked resistance against the Allied occupation in May 1919. The Turkish War of Independence lasted 4 years and ultimately led to the birth of modern Turkey and the final end of the Ottoman Empire. In the opening stages of the conflict, the remnants of the Ottoman government in Constantinople sided with the Allies in hopes of preserving what remained of their state. Opposing them were Turkish nationalists led by the former Ottoman officer Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who controlled much of central Anatolia. At first, the nationalists suffered serious military defeats as Greek and Allied forces advanced deep inland. However, during 1921 and 1922, Turkish forces gradually pushed their enemies back and secured a favorable armistice in October 1922. The following year, under Ataturk's leadership, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara was recognized as the legitimate government of Turkey with the signing of the Treaty of Lausanne, which officially confirmed the independence of the Republic of Turkey. The capital was transferred from Constantinople to Ankara. With that, the Ottoman Empire, which had dominated much of the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe for more than 600 years, was formally abolished and ceased to exist.